Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled The Conductor as Artistic Leader in Pedagogue, Erasing the Line in the Sand. My name is John Pasquale, and I'm joined by my colleague David Clemmer. And today, we are going to explore the critical musical intersection of artistic leadership and musical pedagogy from the podium, including interviews with Professors Rodney Dorsey, Jerry Junkin, H. Robert Reynolds, Kevin Sedetall, Cynthia Johnson-Turner, and William Wakefield.
As the most informed musical performances require a delicate balance of both artistry and technical precision. Today, with the help of our esteemed colleagues, we are going to examine this relationship and share with you a pedagogical system entitled the Directed Listening Model that combines both artistry and technical precision and provides a basis for understanding and achieving this critical musical intersection. So, let's jump in. In his book, The Joy of Music, Leonard Bernstein describes the 19th century conflict between two contrasting schools of conducting, the elegant school attributed to Felix Mendelssohn and the passionate school associated with Richard Wagner. Mendelssohn believed in the exact realization of a musical score driven by technical precision, whereas Wagner sought a more emotional and creatively inspired approach to the score. But are these two schools of thought mutually exclusive? Is it an either-or situation? Bernstein postulates that actually both attitudes are necessary, and neither one is completely satisfactory without the other. Both of them can be badly abused, as we know from having heard performances that seemed clear but were dry as dust, and others in which passion became simple distortion. So we asked our colleagues, what is most important in a discussion of the conductor as artistic leader and pedagogue?
The most important thing is not to separate the two. Artistic leaders should be teachers, and teachers should be artistic leaders. And we should be modeling that on a minute by minute, day by day, second by second, gesture by gesture, conversation by conversation, discussion by discussion basis. That we're constantly developing our own skills to meld those two things, and we are not only that, but we're facilitating our students to do the same.
We're making music. I mean, that's the artistic has to be the highest priority, and the pedagogical things, how you get there and how you teach it is building something structurally and atmospherically, but it doesn't take precedence over the artistic depth of music priority. It has to be in support of that. So in order to get what you want, if you've got a clarinet player that's playing out of tune with a flute player or whatever, and the clarinet player is playing middle line B flat, and most always that clarinet player is going to be a little bit sharp, then you need to know pedagogically that if you put down the C finger on the clarinet and even some of the right hand fingers, you'll lower that without the clarinet player having to go through all kinds of contortions to lower the pitch. So that pedagogically, if you know the instruments and know the idiosyncrasies of the instruments, then you're able to do the pedagogical things, but that's all in service of the artistic intent of the music.
We then asked, how do we balance the simultaneous roles of artistic leader and pedagogue? How do we prioritize from the podium?
I try not to separate artistry and pedagogy. So when you ask, what do I prioritize on the podium in terms of what I'm listening to or what I'm hearing or what's coming back to me, that really depends on how I and how we as an ensemble have prioritized what we're going to learn and what we want to learn. And the other overarching part of this is us truly thinking about why we rehearse. That is so important. And I'm not sure that we think about that enough, or I'm not sure that we think about that deeply enough. And I think that generally we say the answer to that question would be, well, we rehearse to improve. We rehearse to prepare a performance. We rehearse to get better. But I like to think about that a little bit more deeply. And I try to instill that sense of community in an ensemble so that we are thinking all of the time that we rehearse to learn how to deeply listen to each other, to ourselves, to the ensemble. We rehearse to take risks. We rehearse because we want to create an environment that is truly safe, where we can take risks, musical risks. And so when the question comes, what do you prioritize in what you're listening to on the podium, it's all under the umbrella of those overarching concepts.
My priority is to hear what's really going on. And so I try to keep my internal noise down in rehearsal, which is sometimes not easy to do, especially when you have a strong view yourself of how a particular piece is supposed to go. But I want to make sure, so every rehearsal I do is recorded. At UT, it's not recorded in Dallas. But so that I can then listen before the next rehearsal and see if my memory is, if what I'm hearing on the podium is really what's being played, because sometimes your ears or your intuition can tell you something is going to be a problem that isn't really as big a problem in the grand scheme of things, and vice versa. It's like you're giving the horns a little more credit than they deserve over here. And actually, if you were keeping stats, they miss that every time, but you're sort of being nice because, horn is a difficult instrument. So, our personal prejudices can affect our listening, how we're actually hearing the group. So I just want to make sure that I'm hearing what's really going on. As far as what my listening priorities are, that's it. I want to hear everything.
Your listening comes down to score study. The more you study, and the more in depth you've studied, and the more you've created a list of priorities for each section, within those priorities is going to tell you what you want to listen for. It's also having a prioritized list at the top of your score. Okay, this is the priority here. This is the second. This is the third. It's going to give you a rehearsal plan as well. It really helps direct your listening, particularly for younger students that are like, all of this is coming at me. I don't know how to listen to this. Yeah, I guarantee you, if you do more of that and know your music better, you're gonna be a better listener.
So you have to have done enough study and delving into the score and recordings, if there are any, and so on. So you're trying to implant that piece into your inner ear. So when you get up to rehearse and to do things with the music, you're measuring that against what you want to hear. So you have to actually hear what's going on, and then you have to measure that against what is ideal.
Be the best musician you can possibly be. And that you're not there yet. None of us are, right? So we're just constantly trying to get better. And you do that by training your weaknesses, not your strengths. You have to constantly train your weaknesses as a musician. We did this, or we should have done this, when we were in the practice room in our undergrad, right? High school and undergrad. But we don't. We tend to, because we're human beings and we want to feel good, we tend to practice what we're good at. But we all have musical weaknesses, whether that be rhythm or intonation or hearing balance or hearing blend or hearing lots of things at the same time. And we tend not to train those weaknesses. We tend to go after in rehearsal what we are good at going after or what we are good at hearing. And that is okay, but your ensemble and your environment in the ensemble will never improve beyond that point. So I believe as conductors and musicians that we need to constantly be training what we're not very good at.
If you know the instruments and know the idiosyncrasies of the instruments, then you're able to do the pedagogical things, but that's all in service of the artistic intent of the music. And skill comes in various packages. You have to have conducting skill, you have to have good ears, and you have to have knowledge of the instruments that you're working with. I took flute 5 days a week for a semester. And at the end of the semester, I played my final on the Handel Third Flute Sonata. I still remember that. I loved it. I took bassoon for a semester, 5 days a week for a semester, and played my final on a reed I made myself. So people just have to know the technicalities of each of the instruments. There's so many idiosyncrasies about the instrument, just a small one. What's the difference between, sorry, I'm talking so fast, I'm just passionate about this. What's the difference between a horn embouchure and a trumpet embouchure? You have to know that. And what's the difference between a clarinet embouchure and a saxophone embouchure? They're very close, but they're not the same. Anyway, you know my feeling. I think you have to know the instruments. So last thing on this, and then you have to know when you're dealing with an ensemble, when the saxophone plays the lowest note on the instrument, can that saxophone play the lowest note on the saxophone really softly with ease? Can a clarinet player play the lowest note on the clarinet very softly, easily? Those are two different answers. With a saxophone, it's really hard to do. With a clarinet, it's really easy to do. What about the oboe? What about the bassoon? When the piccolo plays in the high range, is that usually sharp or flat? When the flute plays in the high range, is it usually sharp or flat? What about the low range on flute and piccolo? They have the reverse intonation tendencies in those ranges. But you need to know that, and those are the skill things that you have to know.
Something I think is really important, and there was a time in my high school teaching days when I did not trust my students as far as I could throw them. So you've got to find a way to trust them individually and collectively. Because I was just in a bad spot with my group. I didn't trust them. So anything that went wrong, I didn't think they would take ownership, and I had to fix everything. And I had to get over that, and it was taxing for a while, but I finally let that go. And if you just go at this from a side of even middle school students, man, those kids are smart. You know, if you do a good job of teaching them, you can trust them to get things done.
How do we address pedagogical concerns from the podium?
Again, I go back to the idea that I rehearse to try to make the music. So I'm rehearsing the music and the artistry, if you want to call it that. I tend to call it just music making. And then if something happens along the way, somebody plays a wrong note or is out of rhythm or the pitch is wrong or so forth, then I feel I have to stop to make a correction. I don't really want to. I feel like I've interrupted my momentum in the making of the music, but I can't just let it go by. The reverse side of that is what I see so often, and what I did when I first started, and what I see so often now is people just rehearse what's wrong. And with the idea that if they fix everything that's wrong, then they'll get to the music. The problem is that you never can complete that process of fixing everything. So there's always something more to fix. So consequently, the music gets kind of last place. The performance is clean and in tune and balanced in the right tempo, and all the objective things are right, but I'm not feeling the music.
if we have created an atmosphere where they are compelled to watch and listen, right? And we are being the most artistic that we can be for that moment in time of music. And we're sensitizing our students and our ensemble members to be aware of us. Then when there's a problem, we should look at us first. We should look at ourselves first. Specifically, if there's a pulse issue, and we all know this, but it's worth repeating, stop conducting, right? As soon as we get off the box and facilitate, we take one sense out of the equation, so they don't have to watch anymore, right? Or focus anymore, or even in their peripheral deal with that, and they can just zone into what's happening in the ensemble. 9 times out of 10, that has worked in terms of fixing any kind of pulse or even tempo issue, right? They'll figure it out because they they want to, right? They want to figure it out. And it doesn't matter if you're dealing with a professional ensemble, a college ensemble, or a beginning ensemble. As soon as they say, we did this ourselves, they are so empowered, right? And getting off the podium and facilitating them doing it on their own is so much more valuable to them and teaches them so many skills other than just music on what they're capable of, not just as an individual, but as an ensemble. And that comes back to why we rehearse in the first place, right? To facilitate this deep connection and deep listening. And you don't always need a conductor for that. In fact, you often don't need a conductor for that. The other thing I will say about that is that if I'm dealing just with pedagogy in a rehearsal, I will get off the box and I won't conduct. I'll try not to conduct. I think that one of the harmful things that we can do as artistic leaders is to become metronomic or kind of robotic when we're standing on the podium or when we're standing in front of our ensemble. So any kind of pulse issue, I'll stop conducting and I'll move around the ensemble. Any kind of pedagogy where we're dealing with a rhythmic issue that isn't working and perhaps we turn to singing or clapping or both, I'll get off the podium. So as much as possible, any kind of pedagogy problem that's happening in the ensemble, I won't conduct it. As much as I possibly can, I try to, quote unquote, fix technical issues in a musical way. So I will try to address anything that's going wrong, whether that be a pulse or rhythm or just wrong notes, etc., balance, blend, all of that stuff. I try to come at that from a musical point of view. So as opposed to saying you're sharp or you're out of tune, I will come at that from a question, try to come at that from questions. So, hey, Sally, is John playing louder or softer than you in your section? And very often the answer is, I don't know. And then run it again, and then they're listening specifically for that. And 9 times out of 10, that will fix issues because they're just listening on a deeper level.
But students weren't as prepared at that first rehearsal as they should have been. And so then it's my job to point that out. And in hopefully a humane way, I think I'm a nice person, but I also want it, it's obvious to everyone. It just needs to be stated sometimes when things are not at the level they should be. And also, to, I don't know that the right word is exposing, but when something's not there, you just, can we just try that again? And I always remember the words of one of my colleagues who said, so that's an example of your best work? So, it's just something that lets everyone know that this is, you don't need to go on and on about it. You don't need to throw a fit. You don't need to, throw a tantrum. But clearly if there's some expectation and pride in the group, then they know that the next time this had better be better. So I think there is a part of that that is just, I hate to say making an example out of people, because it's not punitive. It's not going down the line. It's not making an individual play, but it's making an example of the fact that, okay, yeah, we don't have our act together like we should.
Sometimes the way you learn anything is to break it down to simple components. So if it's too complex in the whole, the artistry is obviously part of that whole. And but if you're having trouble getting there, then it's about breaking it into chunks, parts of it that will allow you to be successful. I think that's just pretty obvious. There's nothing brilliant about that. But simplify. Just remember there are steps. They need bridges to go someplace. And so starting where you are and going across that bridge, sometimes make some of those mechanical adjustments necessary to focus on to get to, well, you just have to remember to keep going. That the goal, the notes are not the finished product. So just think about the bridges, the path that you're going to get someplace.
So the real question then is, how do we do this? First, as Dr. Turner states, we must be willing to train our weaknesses and continue evolving into the best musicians we can possibly be. Second, as Professor Reynolds so passionately shared, we must admit that we may not have all of the answers, and we must strive to seek them out, to develop and hone our skills, and to build a detailed knowledge of the subject matter of music and music making. And third, we must, as Dr. Sedetol mentioned, direct our listening. In our experience and research over the past 15 years, we've codified a system that helps achieve these goals by outlining the roles of the artistic leader and pedagogue into a defined model. And within that model, artistry is the ultimate goal for which all other components of music making are in service. Truly understanding the subject matter of music making and how we aurally analyze sounds is difficult to codify, but we have attempted to do so with the creation of the directed listening model.
Within ensemble performance, technical and abstract components are combined to achieve the goal of musical artistry. The directed listening model defines and codifies the technical components as pulse, sound production, and comprehensive balance, while more abstract elements are clarified in the component of musicality.
To assist in conceptualization, the directed listening model is represented in the form of an atom, with musicality at the nucleus. Artistry occurs at the nuclear intersection of abstract musicality and conceptual musicality, as it is the ultimate goal of any musical performance. The technical components of the model revolve around the nucleus and contribute to artistry. Within the model, the components of pulse, sound production, comprehensive balance, and musicality are divided into various subcomponents that further illuminate and clarify the subject matter. We don't have time today on this webinar to fully explore each of these, but we will address a few of the salient points. Before doing so, however, let's briefly discuss our concepts for listening awareness from the podium.
Aural analysis is built upon a detailed understanding of how sounds are produced and relate to each other. And our panelists have described the necessity of score study and instrument knowledge in creating an informed aural image. We can't emphasize this strongly enough. It is also critical to develop our skills of comparing the aural image to the reality of sounds that we're hearing. Even for the most advanced conductors, this process can be ambiguous and sometimes challenging. Within the directed listening model, in an effort to codify the directed listening process for conductors at any level, we've narrowed the aural focus into tangible components called listening awareness levels. These listening awareness levels enable all aspects of individual and ensemble sound to be analyzed as they occur. At listening awareness level 1, the focus is on the sound production of the individual only. Does the individual start notes precisely in time? Is the individual's sound quality consistent throughout the note? And so on. At listening awareness level 2, the focus shifts to how the individual relates all aspects of sound production to the performers immediately around them or sitting on either side of them, in connected trios as shown in the diagram, or within their respective section. At listening awareness level 3, the focus expands to include how sections then relate all aspects of sound production across the full ensemble. The use of these 3 listening awareness levels allows us as conductors to address all aspects of the directed listening model, from the micro to the macro, starting with the component of pulse. The concept of pulse is foundational to everything we do as conductors and musicians, from gesture to the production, the relation, and musical crafting of individual and ensemble sounds. Quite simply, to efficiently and consistently achieve maximum artistry, all sonic events must be aligned and occur at a defined moment in time. In an effort to codify a common vocabulary for both the conductor and performers, the subject matter of musical time, or specifically pulse, can be divided into three subcomponents. And they are 1, the even flow of time and sonic space, 2, pulse and subdivision, and third is rhythm. Within the passage of time, music occurs in defined intervals, and the time period between these intervals we refer to as sonic space. Conceptually, both sonic space and intervals of sound and silence we have defined as rectangles, as shown here. Regardless of the duration, the rectangles depict a defined starting point that sustains to a defined ending point. But why is this important? It's crucial because how sound and silence interact with time largely defines ensemble clarity, and an understanding of these concepts will provide a foundation for musical interactions within the ensemble. Additionally, within the directed listening model, a primary step in understanding and assessing the organization of musical sounds is the internalization of subdivision, which creates the even flow of time. Once an even flow of time is established, all other pedagogical elements may be analyzed within this construct. As illustrated in this graphic, we use the term pulse to indicate the division of sonic space into measurable proportions and beat motion to label the sonic space between pulses. The division of pulses is identified as subdivisions, and for consistency, both conceptually and practically, all subdivisions are represented as rectangular. So, in terms of pulse and subdivision, when we are assessing rhythmic clarity, two factors must be addressed. First, do notes start precisely at the beginning of a subdivision? And second, do they occupy the entire sonic space of that subdivision? If notes do not start precisely at the beginning of a subdivision, ensemble clarity cannot be achieved, as sonic events will not occur at the same time. This means that regardless of specific rhythmic duration or stylistic interpretation, all space of a defined subdivision must be accounted for before moving to the next subdivision or rhythm. The problem is, often this is not the case, and notes are performed unevenly or inconsistently. The graphic that you see here demonstrates this issue. In box A, the upbeats and the downbeats occupy the same sonic space. In box B, however, the upbeats are different lengths, causing an uneven flow of time and therefore a lack of ensemble clarity. So, in terms of pulse, what we may perceive as rushing, in reality, are notes or subdivisions that do not occupy their entire sonic space. In the directed listening model, an understanding of pulse as it relates to sonic space and the even flow of time creates for us as conductors an understanding of when sounds occur. Now, let's take a look at how sounds occur.
Regardless of the repertoire performed or the performance level of the ensemble we are working with, the quality and consistency of sound is the medium by which composer intent is ultimately achieved. And, as discussed earlier by Professor Reynolds, it is also critical for us as conductors to have a robust knowledge of the instruments and sound production so we may effectively deconstruct, identify, remediate, and recontextualize all aspects of ensemble sound. This is true at all levels of music making, from beginning bands to the most advanced collegiate wind ensembles. While this is a large topic to discuss, with the directed listening model, we have codified the subject matter of sound production into these 8 subcomponents. For our limited time today, we can't address all of these, but I would encourage all of us to ask ourselves this question: how well do I actually know this material for wind and percussion instruments? Depending on your situation, you may not address instrument-specific pedagogical issues from the podium, but a working knowledge of this material will inform your score study, the rehearsal process, and how you assess sound production issues from the podium, all of which leads to a more artistic end product. Today, let's look specifically at the subcomponents of sound quality, note shape, and instrumental tendencies. Ensemble clarity is relatively impossible without characteristic sounds, so we must always be mindful from the podium of the quality of every sound that is being produced at the individual level. Performers must also be aware and produce a centered sound with maximum resonance, which is achieved through a balance of proper airstream, embouchure, tongue position, and in some cases, instrument angle or mouthpiece pressure. As shown in this diagram, we characterize all sounds as either centered, above center, or below center. A sound that is above center is often described as thin or nasal, whereas a sound that is below center may be heard as undersupported or dull. In both cases, the sounds would also register on a tuner as sharp or flat, respectively. What is important to note, and something we've included in the directed listening model, the primary issue would not be faulty intonation. It would, in fact, be a lack of resonance. Although simply changing the length of the instrument would produce sounds that match frequency and might actually be labeled as in tune, the resulting combination of section or ensemble sounds would not match resonance and thus lack clarity. Because of this, we believe that it is imperative that performers first understand and produce sounds that are centered and resonant, and we as conductors must realize this important component of sound production even before addressing intonation. Once the concept of resonance is realized, the individual performer must then focus on whether that sound remains consistent from the note start through the note body and to the release. For the directed listening model, we evaluate this note shape using a comparison to a conceptual default note shape, as shown here. The note start should occur precisely in time, and our aural analysis from the podium should focus on pulse consistency of each note start, as well as the consistency of sound at the note start. In other words, are we starting together, and is the sound pure and without distortion at the front of the note? The note body should be sustained with equal volume and resonance and should be unaffected by the note start or release of the note. The release should also be in time and achieve the same clarity and consistency as the note start, and organization of the release is always enhanced when performers approach the note shape exactly the same way in regard to its length and its relationship to pulse and subdivision. When performers are aware of the default note shape and successful in maintaining the parts of the note, resonance and characteristic sound quality will be more consistent. Keep in mind that articulation markings, performance practice, and other factors do affect note shape, and we'll discuss some of these in just a few minutes. But suffice it to say, the artistically informed shape of each note should remain identical between performers, and we as conductors are listening to determine if characteristic, resonant sound quality and consistent note shape is maintained, regardless of register, dynamic, or technical demand. Aside from the physical parameters that may affect sound production, air, embouchure, vowel shape, etc., as Professor Reynolds so passionately presented earlier, there are numerous individual instrument tendencies that must be considered as a critical subcomponent of sound production. The chart you see here is one example. It shows the intonation issues for trumpet created by the harmonic series and cumulative pitch error. Although there is too much information like this to get into today, it is important that we as conductors have a comprehensive understanding of idiosyncrasies like these for the woodwinds, brass, and percussion families alike.
We've discussed when and how sounds occur, and the concept of balance will now allow us to more fully understand how sounds relate. The subject matter of sound relationships can be ambiguous, and as conductors, we often think of balance as simply the manipulation of volume within an ensemble. Within the directed listening model, however, while volume is certainly one facet, we assert that a truly balanced sound must also include the components of pulse and sound production. Therefore, we refer to this component of the model as comprehensive balance, and the process of achieving comprehensive balance is only possible when two things occur. First, through score study, we as conductors have created a detailed aural image that allows for the prioritization of sound relationships. And second, we engage a clearly defined process for communicating engaging understanding of these sound relationships. So, to help codify the content and process of understanding and working with sound relationships, the directed listening model utilizes four subcomponents of comprehensive balance. They are volume, sound color, tonal energy, and ensemble symmetry. In the time we have remaining, we will focus specifically on tonal energy and ensemble symmetry, and an application of these two concepts. Tonal energy is a description of sound or sounds defined by a combination of resonance, sound color, and volume, which is applicable at the individual section or ensemble levels. In this graphic, we see two default note shapes, the top illustrating a note performed with vibrant tonal energy, while the bottom depicts a reduced tonal energy. And if we apply this to a section, we are then able to see how matched tonal energies create what we define in the directed listening model as symmetry, or symmetrical sounds. and then conversely, unmatched tonal energies create asymmetrical sounds. So on a conceptual level, ensemble symmetry refers specifically to how sounds relate as shown in this graphic. Here, the flutes, clarinets, and oboes, using listening awareness level 2, are symmetrical within their own sections, and using listening awareness level 3 are also symmetrical between sections. Once symmetry is understood and achieved, the conductor may then craft and shape sound and color combinations as desired based on score study and composer intent. And when one instrument or color is emphasized or de-emphasized within the context of symmetry, everything else will then support the desired colors symmetrically. So let's look briefly at a score excerpt and apply these concepts to 4 measures from the Strauss Serenade for Winds. As we begin, it's important to re-emphasize that score study is a critical component of creating artistry. Understanding how to organize sound colors within an ensemble per composer intent is a skill set of the utmost importance and only achieved through informed score study. As we look at the score from a comprehensive balance perspective, we as conductors must first determine the specific musical functions of sound. Although there may be additional functions, for the directed listening model, we have codified the basic functions as melodic, countermelodic, harmonic, and rhythmic. Then in a second step, we assign specific roles of sound color to the defined musical function. The directed listening model utilizes 3 general roles of sound color defined by composer intent or desired interpretation, and they are primary color or colors, secondary color or colors, and supportive color or colors. Here is our interpretation of these measures using the directed listening model as a guide, and if we show this graphically, we can see our interpretation more clearly. The primary colors, which we've defined as oboe and horn 1 and 2, should be heard most prominently and support each other symmetrically as a fulfillment of their melodic function. The secondary colors, defined as flute 1 and 2, clarinet 1 and 2, horn 3 and 4, bassoon 2, and contrabassoon, should be less prominent than the primary colors and symmetrically support each other as follows. Flute 1 and 2 should be the most prominent within their assigned countermelodic and harmonic function, and all other voices should support each other symmetrically within their respective functions. Voices with countermelodic function should be heard more prominently than voices with harmonic function, and the rhythmic component or supportive color is the least prominent. The concept of symmetry, when coupled with musical function and roles of sound color, will help achieve maximum tonal energy and artistry within each individual voice, while also allowing for each voice to understand and support the others as assigned in a meaningful and tangible way.
Thus far, we've addressed the mechanics of music making through the concepts of pulse, sound production, and comprehensive balance, each of which are integral to the understanding and realization of our final component, musicality. The abstract nature of musical interpretation may differ from person to person or from piece to piece, but whatever musical decisions we make for maximum artistry, they must be agreed upon and performed uniformly across the ensemble. This uniformity allows for the outgrowth of concrete musical concepts that serve to reinforce the overall artistic product, while also providing a conceptual basis for the future musical decisions. So the nucleus of the directed listening model indicates both abstract musicality and conceptual musicality, and the intersection of both creates the opportunity for the most artistic product. We think of and define abstract musicality as an area that cannot be easily codified and is often taught through modeling or imitation, and is shaped largely by our musical experiences, and on a deeper level, our life experiences. On the other hand, conceptual musicality may be codified, taught, and consistently reproduced. Although other categories may exist or be developed for the specific needs of the ensemble or repertoire, we've divided conceptual musicality into the subcomponents of articulation, dynamics, and phrasing. For today's webinar, we'll focus on articulation and the first subcomponent of phrasing, which is forward motion and musical emphasis. Similar to speech, where articulation shapes distinct spoken sounds, articulation within music defines note shape and is informed by articulation markings. As there are various note shape possibilities, a codification of articulation allows for greater performance uniformity and rehearsal efficiency. Earlier, we introduced a default note shape represented graphically as a rectangle with a defined note start, note body with consistent tonal energy, and a release. We also established that this default note shape functions within the even flow of time and must occupy all of the assigned sonic space. Thus, within the directed listening model, articulation is defined and graphically conceptualized by the manipulation of the default note shape within time. Fundamentally, notes without articulation markings are assumed to be full value and would therefore be represented using the default rectangular note shape without manipulation, as seen here. By adding to or subtracting from the default note shape, we may effect changes of articulation that reflect a desired sonic alteration, specifically at the note start by manipulating the tongue or air, during the note body by adjusting volume, or at the note ending by changing the note's length or shape. As an example, separated notes may be defined by altering note length in relation to the even flow of time. In this case, the note shapes maintain integrity and uniformity, only the duration is altered. By adding emphasis to the front of a note, these same note shapes may be graphically altered to reflect the differences in articulation, but again, the note shapes should remain consistent. Since there are numerous possibilities with regard to stylistic interpretation, a codification of the various articulation markings provides us and the performers a unified approach to artistic reproduction. As such, let's consider the works of Johannes Brahms. Romantic era performance practice would indicate that staccato notation typically be performed with greater length than, say, the neoclassic works of Igor Stravinsky. Sonically, the Brahms staccato is more closely related to the portato note shape that we saw earlier, whereas the Stravinsky staccato is significantly more separated. In both cases, however, the sonic outcome must relate to the articulation markings, and codification serves to clarify the musical interpretation, ensuring greater performance consistency. So within the directed listening model, any articulation may be defined and graphically conceptualized as an alteration of the default note shape within time, the goal being uniformity and consistency across the ensemble. Due to the propensity for multiple interpretations, musical phrasing is often defined as an intimately personal set of choices, driven by human emotion and enabled by musical discovery through score study. But although personal choice may dictate the more abstract areas of phrasing, there are elements that may be conceptualized and thus codified for artistic realization. Within the directed listening model, we have conceptualized forward motion and musical emphasis and how these may inform phrase structure and musical direction. As mentioned earlier, all notes must function within the even flow of time. However, it is common for downbeats to be perceived as strong while upbeats are perceived as weak, which is diametrically opposed to our goal of creating notes that are equal. So, it's necessary to apply some amount of musical emphasis to the upbeat, which will ensure that the upbeat occupies the same sonic space as the downbeat, as well as create musical forward motion by leading the upbeat to the downbeat. This concept of forward motion that we've illustrated using eighth note subdivision may then be applied internally to notes of greater value. For instance, in a group of quarter notes, forward motion is conceptually applied by realizing the eighth note structure and the resultant leading qualities of the smaller subdivisions. Due to the meter, however, a natural agogic emphasis may also be perceived in varying degrees on downbeats, even with an awareness of the internal eighth note structure. In a 4/4 measure, the downbeats of 1 and 3 are typically perceived as strong beats, while 2 and 4 are perceived as weak beats. If we leave these alone, the combination of strong and weak beats may result in notes of unequal tonal energy and a musical phrase that lacks forward motion. To counteract this natural metric construct, the weak beats are given stronger emphasis and direction such that 2 leads to 3 and 4 leads to 1, as shown here. If applied to multiple measures, a conceptual approach to phrasing begins to emerge that maintains forward motion within longer phrases. Considering the strong and weak beat implications of both the metric structure and the internal eighth note subdivisions, the leading quality of beats 2 and 4 serves to obfuscate the metric structure, therefore rendering the bar lines less disruptive within the musical phrase, and we begin to see a pattern of note groupings emerge. And if we take this all a step further, we may combine the conceptual ideas of forward motion, musical emphasis, and the note grouping pattern, apply them to a melody, and realize an informed, conceptual approach to musical direction and phrasing, as we see here with this simple children's tune. So that's an overview of the directed listening model, our humble effort to address the critical musical intersection that exists between artistic leadership and musical pedagogy from the podium. As conductors, we all live within these two defined roles. As artistic leaders, we utilize a multitude of musical skills while simultaneously employing a gestural vocabulary to achieve the desired artistic response. And as ensemble pedagogues, we utilize ensemble rehearsal techniques in conjunction with oral analysis of live sound. But to achieve the most artistic performances possible, we as conductors must be fluent in both roles, as we can't have one without the other, or at least we shouldn't. As Dr. Turner stated so eloquently, artistic leaders should be teachers, and teachers should be artistic leaders, and the metaphorical line that exists between the two must be erased. The question is, how? As our esteemed colleagues admonished, we must train our weaknesses, develop our skills, direct our listening, and always place artistry at the center. While realizing these four is an ongoing and significant undertaking, we believe that having a plan and using a method is critical, and the directed listening model was created to serve this exact purpose. We aren't suggesting that you use it, although we would love it if you did. We are strongly suggesting that you utilize a clearly defined process, a process that works for you, a process that works to erase the line in the sand so often perceived between artistic leader and pedagogue.